Now that we've collected our data, we're going to calculate some death rates. They work very similar to birth rates in terms of calculating accrued death rate is simply the total number of deaths over the total population for the same period of time. And age-specific simply narrows that down to certain age groups. Unlike age-specific fertility rates, which almost always use the same age categories, with age-specific death rates, everybody uses different age categories, except you always have age 0, those under 1 year, as their own category, and you will almost always see 1 to 4 as its own age category. After that, it can vary just depending on the data source and the researcher to what extent they narrow down those age categories. These are 5-year age categories that actually go all the way up to 110 plus. This is an unusually fine amount of detail that you're not going to find in most data sources. It's one of the reasons why I like the Human Mortality Database. All right, so these are going to be age and sex specific mortality rates. There we go. And I'm just going to copy and paste that. I'm going to spread this out just a little bit so it looks better. It's just the stuff that I like to do here. Merge and center. Oops, that was not what I meant to do. There we go, merge and center. All right, it's exactly how you might think. We're going to skip 0 for right now because we need to do infant mortality calculations for that. And we're going to move to here. Equals, to start a formula, open parentheses because we want to dictate our order of operations here. This is going to be deaths, in this case, females age 1 to 4, divided by population, in this case, females 1 to 4, close parentheses, times 1,000. With age-specific mortality rates, you sometimes see them done by a constant and you sometimes don't. I like to do them by constants because I think that's part of the whole point of doing a mortality rate. But because that can be a very small number, even multiplied by a constant, not everybody does it. I can use the power of Excel copy and paste now, Control C or Command C to paste, and the formula, as you see, moves on over to cover males and then total. And then I'm going to copy, and I'm going to bring this all the way down to the bottom, paste, copy, bring that all the way down to the bottom, paste, and copy. Bring that all the way down to the bottom. Next, I'm going to change my decimal level because I don't need all of those in my version of Excel. It's on my toolbar. It may not be on yours. It is part of number formatting. For these age-specific rates, I would say bringing it down to 2 levels of decimal is fine. The reason we need to bring it down to 2 levels of decimal is because we don't even hit 1 until people are age 30 to 34. A couple of other things. I really don't need this. I should have gotten rid of that to start with. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to move that over, and then I'm going to delete that. Well, this is kind of fun to watch. These formulas, you'll note, are based on these columns, C4, F4, for instance. I'm going to delete this, delete, and bingo. It moved with it. It knew what I did, and it took care of it. All right, now to get the accrued death rate, I need totals, so I'm going to do my totals. And that, if you'll recall, is just summing up, so equals sum, open parentheses, the stretch that I want to add together, close parentheses, enter. And then I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste all the way to there. I don't want to copy those because that's a different formula. All right, that's spelled out the way I need it to be. Now for this, I'm just going to copy these, because that's a formula, down to there, because I want it to calculate the accrued death rates. So what we see here is that the accrued death rate in the United States, and in fact I don't have room for a title here, so I'm going to insert a new row, and lo and behold, my formulas move with me. It's no biggie. I'm going to insert another one, and I'm going to say deaths and death rates United States 2010, deaths and death rates by sex, United States 2010. There we go. That will help remind me. And then another little thing I want to remember is my source. I'll probably come back in and make this nicer, but this is a working table. This is just so that I don't forget. Human mortality database. Pop back over here, hit the back arrow so that I get there. Copy. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Source human mortality database B. There we go. And I've decided I don't need that much space in between. Delete those and go ahead and pull that over like that. There we go. Feeling pretty happy about this working table now, in which I have calculated all of my age-specific rates and my crude rates. Last thing I need to do is calculate my infant mortality. Infant mortality does not use the population during that year as the population at risk of mortality. The reason for that is that infant mortality is higher than mortality at these other age. In fact, infant mortality is higher than any other mortality until, in the United States at least, you get up here to age like 50, between 55 and 59. What that means is that this population number will always be lower than the actual number of infants that were at risk of dying in that year. It's the births during that year that are at risk of dying during that year, and that's why we went out and got births. So in this case, we were talking about doing this formula equals, open parentheses, deaths divided by births, making sure I'm getting the right column here, close parentheses, times 1,000. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that. Control copy and control paste. And then I'm going to reduce my decimal level for consistency. So while this is not terribly high, if I were to try to calculate this using the population, I would end up with this. Female slash, and then the female population times 1,000. You'll notice it's not that terribly different. I'm going to go ahead and do the male and the total. And that's because in the United States, while our infant mortality rate is higher than in most developed nations, it's still really low. But this is slightly higher, slightly higher, slightly higher. And that's because this number, the population number, is slightly lower than it should be because of these deaths that have occurred. 10,000 deaths, 13,000 deaths, 25,000 total. All right, I'm going to get rid of that now that you understand why we use births instead of population. We now have we have calculated 1, 2, 3 types of measures here by sex and total. We have our infant mortality rate by sex and total. We have our age-specific mortality rates by sex and total. And we have our crude death rate by sex and total. As you can see, mortality is higher at all ages for males until you reach the oldest old. And that's simply because there are so many more, oops, wasn't meant to happen. There we go. So many more women than men at those ages that it just overwhelms even the rate. There's a lot of reasons for this. At these ages, they're very similar, but once you start moving into, here we go, teenage years and young adult years, where male mortality is 3 times what it is for females. These are all accidental deaths, most of those due to cars, speeding, things of that nature. Things, they're not getting that much better. You still continue to have that higher mortality, mostly due to accidental death. When you reach these ages, this is where it starts to have to do with the differences in cardiovascular health. And it's really not until the very oldest of old ages that you start to see a little bit of a flip. And it's because by the time you reach this point, these men who are still alive, you know, they're like horses. I mean, there's just like nothing healthier than these guys at this point because they've lived for so long. There's not very many of them. Most of the time when you're going to be calculating age-specific rates, you're not going to have this level of detail. And in fact, in another one of the videos that dealt with some of our other data sources, you'll see that usually we see ages 0, 1 to 4, and then kind of childhood, young adult, and then some larger categories for the adult ages.